Hello, friends. Welcome to the Rhythm Changes podcast. I'm your host, Chris Fraser. I'd like to start by saying thank you to the RC Pod community for welcoming me so warmly after episode 101. To everybody who reached out with words of appreciation and encouragement, I owe a sincere and heartfelt thank you. Special thanks to Maddie Elkins, of course, for agreeing to be a guinea pig in this podcast experiment. Congratulations, Maddie. You passed the test. Your reward pellet is in the mail. But thanks again, seriously, to everybody, people sharing, people writing their thoughts on social media, all that kind of stuff. I honestly, I really do appreciate that. And it's very motivating. I can't wait to keep going. This episode you're about to hear is great. We've got some fantastic guests coming down the pipeline, cooking in the podcast kitchen. So stay tuned. See you soon. So this episode with Jon Korsrud is one of those episodes where the conversation was already in full swing by the time I hit the record button. I've known Jon for a while through the scene, as well as having played in his VCC bigger band just a couple years ago. We talk about his upbringing, playing with Canadian jazz royalty, his own legendary group, the Hard Rubber Orchestra, and even Burning Man. It's a great conversation, so let's get into it. Today, my guest is a trumpeter, a teacher, and is known as one of the country's great composers. His large ensemble, you're shaking your head. His large ensemble, the Hard Rubber Orchestra, nominated for a Juno just last year, has been operating for over 35 years now. It's my pleasure to have him on the podcast, Jon Korsrud.
Thanks, Chris.
How's it going?
Yeah, good. Thank you. I'm very honored that you would ask me to be part of this. So I'm very honored. Thank you.
I'm honored that you said yes. Yeah, so where were we? We were in the middle of a conversation right before this.
What were we talking about? We were talking about Evan Cribbs and people starting big bands with Leo Bay and
Evan
stuff
Cribb.
like that. Like at your era at Cap. And you seemed like you thought everyone was starting. And it's kind of true. Like Chris Berner started a big band.
Yeah.
And now Casey.
Yeah.
She has a big band. And
yeah. Dean Thiessen.
Yeah. And it's... I don't know why people do that. You have to be a little bit creative. Oh, and then, before that, it was Dan Herzog. And
that's right, yeah.
And,
there's got to be something going on up there.
And then Michael Kim.
Yep,
he wanted to be
for sure.
That kind of makes sense because that's the kind of player that he is. So,
yeah.
And I
he really
get
slots
that.
into
you can't
that.
Just hope, and I definitely prescribe to that thing. Like, you don't want to just sit by the phone and hope someone calls you. It's kind of best to make things happen and form a band and make your own gigs kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I want to get back to the beginning though. I don't even know this. Are you originally from Vancouver?
Since I was 4 years old.
4. Okay.
Yeah, I was born in Regina.
Right.
But we moved from 4 because my dad was a marijuana dealer, and my mom we found out that the RCP knew. So my mom said, "That's it. We're moving from Regina." But we had a relative here, so we moved to Vancouver, and thank God we moved to Vancouver because I love Vancouver, and I think I'd be a very different person had I spent my whole life growing up in Regina.
Yeah, probably.
Even though I think a lot of Vancouverites, jazzers, I think Caldestad is from there, and John Ballantyne. And
Steve calls us from a smaller town, I think. I can't remember the name. Yeah. But it's near Regina, I believe.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So do you have a lot of family in the prairies?
Not anymore.
Oh, okay.
No, yeah.
And so since 4, you've lived in Vancouver proper, like the city of Vancouver.
That's right.
Yeah. That's great. I love to hear that opinion on Vancouver too, because it's so common. I mean, rents are high. It makes sense. People are so down on Vancouver. Like people in my generation and younger.
It's different now. It's different in the last 10 years, 15 years than when I was your age.
Yeah.
How old are you? You 30 or so?
I'm 32.
32.
Yeah.
I don't know how my students do it or the service industry. It's very different now. Also, when I was your age and younger, playing trumpet, I could play trumpet in big bands, funk bands, Caribbean bands. I can make enough money to pay my rent. But my rent was like $400 a month or $500 a month, kind of. Even though it was a long time ago, there was enough work around because bands needed horn sections.
Yeah,
and so I was always employed enough. And
yeah.
But the young trumpet players today, I don't know, it's tough.
Yeah.
You
As a
know,
trumpet player, I mean,
like
yeah.
bands do not have horn sections anymore.
I know,
Back
yeah.
then, is like Tower of Power, Earth and Fire, and Chicago
Mm.
were kind of like, that from the 70s. So that was still kind of a thing to have horn sections.
Yeah.
And so no, but I was lucky then, and I was thinking people our age were a little bit more lucky because I think there was a lot of more work, anyways.
Yeah.
Now DJs have kind of taken over a lot as far as hotel gigs and things like that. It's easier just to hire one DJ rather than audition tapes and bring in bands and do sound checks and all that sort of stuff. So and I think the rents are higher downtown too. So it's more prohibitive for a club to hire a band than it is to hire one person to be a DJ.
Totally, yeah. Although DJs, I mean, they make a killing too.
Yeah,
but
they can.
Depending on the gig, I guess. But yeah, like it is because as far as like I've been able to tell, like gigs have paid the same forever.
Yeah.
Like it just hasn't caught up with inflation.
It depends.
Like in the 90s, you were making $100.
Like as far as doing club works, like I was doing like Liber Room 10 years ago for $70, and now it's now I don't know what clubs like those kind of places pay now, $80 to $100. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not that much different.
The Liber Room, I think, was known as a low paying gig for a while though.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it is funny that like, I've heard, stories of being able to pay your rent in a weekend from just having like 2 or 3 gigs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's...
Well, it depends who you are and it depends the kind of gigs you're doing.
Yeah.
Like if you're doing more kind of show stuff all the time, then you're going to get paid $300 or $400 a gig kind of thing. But people like, or if you do a lot of casual work, like I'm not part of that scene either. I don't do weddings and
me neither.
Corporate gigs and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So like when you, I mean, like I could tell like you really love Vancouver. Like what is it about Vancouver that like makes your heart flutter?
Oh, it's the most beautiful city in the world.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, the more you travel, the more you kind of go, oh yeah. Now when I tell people, when I hear about that Vancouver's a beautiful city, I now know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's gorgeous. But my roots here also, and
so where'd you go to elementary school?
Lord Tennyson in Kitsilano.
Okay, nice.
And I grew up in a hippie family, and Kitsilano was the hippie part of town, kind of like a little more like Commercial Drive used to be a little while ago.
Okay, yeah.
But not even Commercial Drive is gentrified.
Yeah.
But back then, and then I went to Kids High School, and it was the hippie, and 4th Avenue was the hippie part of town, kind of like what Commercial Drive is. Yeah. So I was walking distance from the beach.
Totally. Yeah.
And we would skip out. So it was spring. So as it became nice, we'd be skipping school and go head down to the beach.
Yeah, it is really amazing. I was in Montreal earlier this summer. I was there for 2 weeks, and Montreal's amazing. It's like such a cool city, and like you can tell like they're really just sort of like squeezing all the juice out of the summer that they have because as soon as it's winter,
I was there twice this summer.
Yeah,
and I haven't really experienced summer in Montreal like that too. And it's like they open up the streets.
Yeah.
And it's like these big kind of street festivals in a sense.
Exactly.
And it's like everyone, there's just so much going on. There's like so much of nightlife, and like that's exciting. That's why I went to Days-Ons a couple of times.
Yeah.
Never made it to the what's called the upstairs. Never made it there. But I was there for the Jazz Fest, and I'd never been there. And I have a good jazz. I've been there once before, and that was the story in itself. I was 20 years old, playing with Hugh Fraser and Veggie.
Yeah.
And I chipped my tooth the day before the concert. We're playing in an outdoor festival. And I couldn't play above the staff. I'm playing like lead trumpet. I couldn't play above the staff, and it was horrible. And so that was the last time I was in Montreal for the Jazz Fest. I was 20 years old. So this time I went back, and it's a great vibe going on there. So that was fun.
Yeah, like the streets are just crawling with people, and like the one thing that's you definitely must have noticed is just that there's stuff happening at night.
Yeah,
like that doesn't happen here.
Yeah. That's right.
And like Steph and I would just go walking and just try to find something happening.
Yeah.
And we would just stumble upon.
There's a great nighttime energy of stuff going on.
It's and you don't see that here. And so like Vancouver is like cursed with like this incredible landscape where like it is indescribable. And like you almost can't find it anywhere else.
Yeah.
Where you have a view of the mountains from the beach.
Yeah.
It is like truly.
Well, there's a theory, and I don't know if it's true. There's a theory that the more beautiful the city is, the less they depend on the arts to make their citizenship happy.
Oh, wow.
So like cities like, I'm not going to name any cities, but like, often cities like, but like you don't need a lot of, in the same way. You don't need a lot of arts in Vancouver because people just go to the beach or go hiking and all that sort of.
They can be fulfilled.
We're surrounded by. All that being said, though, I think Vancouver is very well known for having really high levels of music here. The musicianship here is great, and the art scene here is great.
I've always felt that way.
Yeah.
Is that I can't imagine some musicians here. I can't imagine there being better musicians.
Yeah.
You don't get
But I think every city must be like that. Like Cincinnati and Cleveland, they must have their burning musicians and all that sort of stuff. And I remember even a long, long time ago when I was in my early 20s, when someone would come to town, like a Freddie Hubbard or Phil Woods, or whatever, they had to pick up a local thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like the local bands would always be Torben Oxbow or Renee Worst on bass, Ted Quinlan on guitar. I can't remember who the drummer would be back then, but they would always say Ted Quinlan was the amazing dude. Do you know who that is? He's a Toronto guitarist.
Okay.
Amazing. He moved out of Vancouver probably around 1990 or 95 or so.
Okay.
But he was the motherfucker at the time.
Yeah.
And the guys and the touring says Vancouver's got New York level musicians, except in New York there's 200 times as many of them.
Yeah.
Now I think there's way more of them today in Vancouver. There's so many world class level musicians in Vancouver now.
Yeah.
And I think we really hold our own for the small city that we are. We're a tiny town. We can't forget that.
Yeah, it is small.
It's not until I go to Montreal or Toronto and I come back and we're a tiny. Commercial Drive is considered a scene.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's literally a street.
And it's just
Yeah, it's part of a street.
That's right.
Yeah, the drive is not even the whole
4 blocks long.
Yeah,
6 blocks long.
That's true. Well, it's Little Italy now.
That's right.
That's what they're calling it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even though Joe's is closing. You heard about that?
Yep.
Come on.
Well, nobody goes to Joe's anymore. Nobody's going to Joe for 20 years.
Yeah, no one's going to Joe's for a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
I mean, I went there to watch the World Cup a couple times.
Okay.
Because it gets crazy in there.
Well, Joe's used to be the epicenter of Commercial Drive.
Yeah.
It was it was the center of Commercial Drive, and all these people, all the intellectuals and blah, blah, blah would hang out there. And then Joe, he was Portuguese. There was an incident where these two girls were making out. These two women were making out at Joe's, and he flipped out and he kicked them out.
Oh.
And that was 1990 or so, I'm going to say.
Wow.
I'm going to guess. And then there were all these pickets and protests outside, and then it was very uncool to go there. And it never recovered. And then people just started going to Turks or the other, one of the other 20 places you could go.
Yeah.
But it used to be the epicenter of Commercial Drive. And then it never recovered from what I call the incident.
Yeah. So that's early cancel culture.
Yeah, that's 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've always had it, but there wasn't Instagram, Twitter and stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
People would actually organize.
But I remember that well. It was protests outside. And then people were just well, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to go to one of the other 15 places I could go to on Commercial Drive. And but he apparently I heard that he actually owns the building.
Oh,
Joe. So
that's uncommon.
He's going to sell that beautiful location
on the corner
for a developer. You could sell that for what? 10 million? I have no idea, right? They'll put up a tower or something there. Right?
Wow. Yeah. Well, I guess good for him.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to start getting towers on Commercial Drive now for sure.
Yeah.
Or at least nearby. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it.
Yeah, but I was been in Vancouver my whole life. I loved Vancouver. I lived in Amsterdam for a while in the mid 90s when it was time for, after a while you get your degree and people go away to study. Yep. And most of my friends went to New York. Almost everyone I went to New York for at least a year or two.
Yeah.
But I'm not really a jazz musician, in the same way that a lot of my friends were, like beboppers. And I was more combining classical and jazz composition to one thing.
Okay. So I was reading that that interview that you sent me, and you talk a little bit about third stream music and how it's a combination of the worst parts of jazz and classical.
Yeah.
Can you describe that?
That's the old term for it. That's like Gunther Schuller and these classical musicians trying to combine jazz, and I guess Leonard Bernstein was doing. They coined the term third stream, which I jokingly refer to is combining the both worst aspects of both idioms, and as you try to combine ideally the best thing. So I was always trying to combine the excitement and unpredictability of jazz with the control that you get through composition.
Right.
And because I was at UBC and my degree is in classical music, not jazz.
Right.
Even though I kind of grew up as a huge jazz fan. And
When you played with Veggie and
yeah. I could, and I
got the accolades. You went to
I was a groupie of Veggie because
Hugh Fraser Jazz University.
Yeah, that's right. And he was my mentor for a long, long time. Because when I first discovered them, I was probably like 17, 18 years old, and they would have been they were like early 20s, but they were like all these crazy virtuoso young musicians who wore leather jackets and smoked on stage and drank, and they were like punk rock and playing like late Coltrane, and it was like Maynard Ferguson meets Art Ensemble Chicago meets Sun Ra. And for me at that time, because I was into punk rock and shit, and that was like the most exciting thing I can imagine. So I thought they were like the greatest bands. I'd go to all their gigs, and then they had to go to Banff for 3 months, and they asked a bunch of trumpet players to play lead, and none of them could make it. But I was kind of hanging around there, and I could play high notes, I could play loud, and I was playing some lead and some various college bands around town. So they asked me to go.
Okay.
And that was a big life-changing...
Did you study trumpet at UBC?
Trumpet and composition, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And, and that was a life-changing thing for me because I got to play with Dave Holland and meet Dave Lehman and Julian Priester. And Kenny Wheeler later in the summer, and John, all that sort of stuff. So I was 20 years old at the time.
Yeah.
And I was already into experimental music, but that was a huge thing. I getting to hang out with Veggie and playing every day. And they were like 1,000 times better than me. So that was great to be surrounded by musicians who are 1,000 times better than you.
Yeah.
Because you have to like work your ass off just to try to keep up.
Oh my God.
And then Hugh was very patient with me. Even when he got back to town, he kept hiring me for a few more years.
Cool.
So it was I was very grateful to Hugh for like getting me under his wing a little bit and mentoring me. And I kind of followed his footsteps a little bit as far as like Hugh liked organizing stuff. That's what he liked to do. And he doesn't wait for things to happen. You make things happen.
Yeah.
And
totally.
So that was kind of but I was like that also since high school, elementary school, actually. In elementary school, I would transcribe Cheech and Chong plays and Monty Python plays and rehearse them and perform in front of the school. So I think that was already in my, what's the word, in my DNA.
Yeah.
That's so... And I noticed that today. So there are some people who just like organizing things.
Yeah.
And I think I'm like that. I think I've always been like that.
That makes sense.
But I love being a sideman too. I love just showing up to a gig.
Oh man, there's nothing like it.
Here, show up this time, bring a music stand, here's your music.
It is really, it's nice. Like as long as if the music is good, that's great.
Yeah.
But even when the music's not good, your name's not on the bill. You show up and you play, you do your job.
I was rehearsing with Jill Townsend's big band last night, and we're performing tonight actually. And I'm going,
oh great.
I'm playing third trumpet, and I'm going, yeah, this is what I love. This is the most fun to do, and it's social, and get to play with really good music with really good musicians, and for me that's as fun.
But yeah, like playing an instrument is the short term, right? Like you're just like in the moment.
Yeah,
you're playing, you're expressing yourself.
Yeah,
and you're like you're in the band, right?
With good musicians. Yeah. And everyone's focused and concentrating, and it's a fun vibe because we all know each other.
Yeah.
And
So some people are like, this is all I need, right? Like just to be in the band, just to be playing my instrument. So why do you go from that being in Veggie, like I assume you were probably like, it sounds like you were treated great in that band, and you learned a whole bunch. And so how do you go from that to being like, no, I want to?
That's a good question. That's a good question. So when I was at UBC, the big band leaders, the big band directors of the jazz ensemble there were Ian McDougall or Dave Robbins before that. I mean, I played in all the big bands around town. I played, they're like 3 or 4 a week I was in. They were like, UBC, VCC, CAP. So I was doing at least 3, and I think it was even one of the schools had 2. So a lot of us were doing that, just playing. And it was led by Fred Stride and Ian McDougall and Dave Robbins. Okay. And I was doing that all the time because I played lead. I could play higher and I could play loud, and I was playing lead trumpet. Yeah. But you play that music all the time. And then I got interested in classical composition at UBC. And then I decided, I got interested in more of the avant-garde kind of composition and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And then I realized, I can combine the two things. I can combine jazz musicians and their background with improvisation. And I was inspired by a couple of composers named Lutoslawski and Penderecki.
Yeah.
And
you mentioned Ligeti.
Yeah, and how they combine. And so I got used to that sound world, but I also knew that sound world previously from my interest in free jazz. I'm playing a little bit of free jazz before that. And so it's the same sound world.
Yeah.
But instead of coming from the improv side, you come in from the compositional side.
Yeah.
And then I went, oh, what if I combine both? And that seemed like a ground that wasn't explored very much.
Yeah.
So I was on my birthday, and I remember it very clearly. I was hanging out with Ross Taggart, and who was a Vancouver tenor and pianist who died quite early at 45, I believe it was. He was only 45, and he was my best friend. And on my birthday, it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. We were drinking beers, and I said, "I'm going to form a big band," and so there was a place called the Glass Slipper, 11th and Main. It was in the basement downstairs. It's kind of a co-op, and I put together the band, and all the veggie guys were still my best friends, or still close friends of mine. So I asked them to be in the band, and it made sense to me to form a big band because all my friends were trombone players, guitar players, and drummers, and it didn't make sense for me to write string quartets because that's not really who I was. So then Hard Rubber started, and even then, I was part of the theater department at UBC as well. I became writing music for theater, and I became interested in big theater and how music could influence theater and theater can influence music. I know that sounds obvious, but to actually be there and go, oh, well, this is the direction to go. If you want to go in a direction that hasn't been explored that much, and if your music is going to be as impactful as possible, this is the way to go. So I started studying theater and performance art. And so when I graduated from BC, I wanted to do this big performance art kind of thing. And the Hard Rubber Orchestra was just supposed to be the orchestra that I wrote the music for, to record the music in a concert to use as my support material for a grant.
Okay.
That was the only reason for the Hard Rubber Orchestra.
Wow.
So I put together the band, did the concert. We're doing a press release with my friend Chris Nelson, who's another bass player, who died young. I think he might have been 45 as well, I think. He was a very good bass player. He played in Veggie as well for a long time.
Yeah.
But he was one of the few guys back in 1990 who had a computer and a printer.
Oh, nice.
1990. So I went to his place.
Guy.
Yeah. So we was going to make our first press release. It was called the John. I couldn't think of a name for the orchestra. I thought for months, couldn't come up with a name. Everything I came up with, the closest I came was the John Korsrud's casual sports outfit, but I didn't like that either.
I like that. That's good. I like that.
Yeah. Maybe
Hard Rubber is an awesome band name.
But anyways,
so good.
So he's about to press print on the press release, and he goes, "John, you got to call it something funkier than that." And I went, I know. And he had a book of orchestration on his desk, and I opened it up, and I put my finger down, and I went, Hard Rubber. And it was either Hard Rubber mouthpieces or Hard Rubber mallets. And I forget which one it was. And I went, Hard Rubber, perfect.
Wow.
And if I'd known I would have had this band for 35 years, I might have put my finger down a second time. But Hard Rubber seems to be
it was
right
random.
Name. Yeah.
It was fully
100% random. And at the time, and I went,
wow.
Hard Rubber Orchestra, perfect.
That is really just so perfect.
Yeah.
Though. It is such a good name.
Yeah.
It's so like.
But I wonder if people who don't know the
never
band,
even ask about it, right?
What's
They're
that?
just like it's almost like it's like such a timeless band name. It's like people probably just like do people
have asked me if there's a sexual connotation on it.
What?
I have no idea what you're talking about. So I think that's more on you than it is on me. But
I that never occurred.
No, that's right.
Now.
Never occurred to me either.
Maybe
I hang out with
naive.
a lot of sick and depraved friends. What can I say?
Yeah.
So then Hard Rubber started, and we. And I would do it like maybe 3 concerts a year. And so that big multimedia show, theatrical show did happen.
Yeah.
That happened in 1991, I believe it was, summer of 91.
Yep.
And then I met, and then I kept doing concerts. And by the 6th concert, people would sub out at the last minute.
Yeah.
And I totally get it because we're only paying $50 at the time, which is actually pretty good for 1990 for a big band.
Yeah.
And I'm doing all the publicity and all the posters myself and writing all the music. But people were subbing out last minute to do actual paying gigs. And I was lamenting this to my friend Jeff Corness, who is a composer for theater and dance. And I wish I had more money to pay musicians and stuff. He goes, well, actually, there's a woman named Diane Cadota who's starting up an arts management company, and she's looking for clients. Maybe you should meet her. So I invited her to one of my shows, and she liked it. And then we started working together since December 1992.
All right.
And then we did our first big theater show in October 1995 called the Elvis Cantata. And there was a big multimedia show at St. Andrew's Wesley's Church.
Cool.
And I was all this video, and I was breaking tons of copyright laws, but you just kind of do it. And because I'm using video from sources I'm not really legally allowed to. But I'm 28 years old. I'm 30 years old. I'm doing this, right? And somehow,
unlike some musicians, you're not a lawyer.
What's that?
You're not a lawyer.
I'm not a lawyer. But you get away with stuff because we're underground anyways. And that somehow got our name known across Canada.
Yeah.
And then CBC wanted to record us. The National Arts Centre wanted to do a version. We eventually did a television version for CBC television in 2005, 10 years later. So that kind of got us known a little bit.
Yeah.
And then that was 95. And then that was 94. And then 95, I did a multimedia show with Kokoro. Week at the Jazz Festival, and that was really good. And then in 95, I got a scholarship to go to Amsterdam for a couple of years.
Great.
To study composition there.
Who did you study with?
A guy named Louis Andriessen, who was a very famous composer. He's probably, at that time, one of the more well-known composers on the planet at that time.
What did you take away from him?
Well, I got there because I was studying from UBC, and I know it's time to go away. And my friend, Paul Steenhuisen, had studied with him. And it was time for me to go to New York or someplace.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, Louis might be a good teacher for you because he actually likes jazz, which a lot of classical composers don't."
Yeah.
And I visited Amsterdam, and this is and it's more my interest in music, which they're more of an oddball. They're not a bebop city. They're kind of half jazz and half classical.
Yeah, so that European.
Yeah, totally what I was into. It's a small romantic city. It's like the size of Vancouver. Small.
Yeah, it's very Vancouver-like, right?
Yeah, and the same climate. And I had some friends who lived there, and I just kind of gravitated to that city right away. And once I got there, it was the perfect fit for me. I got involved in the scene right away. There weren't not a lot of trumpet players. I formed a big band there that still existed for another 10 years after I moved away.
What was that called?
It was called Ted Zeppi.
Oh.
Yeah. And they played my music for many, many years.
Wow.
So that was kind of cool.
Full big band.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great.
And what happened to these two people wanted to form a big band, but they didn't have any music.
Yeah.
And I was friends with one of the guys. So I was the sole composer for them for a while.
Yeah.
Until more people started. So I had a nice relationship with Amsterdam for a while, and I kept getting commissions from Ted Zeppi and these other new music ensembles there.
Awesome.
And because they ideally were looking for that kind of music that was half jazz, half classical, and half rock and roll.
Oh,
that's what they wanted. They were looking for that fusion, and no
150% music.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so when I was there, people kind of like what I seemed to be the right thing at the right time, and I was getting busy as a composer and stuff like that.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that was cool. And then life brought me back to Vancouver, and which I kind of lamented the fact that I wasn't part of Amsterdam anymore because I really felt like that was my home at that point.
So how long total were you in Amsterdam?
I was there for 2 full years.
Yeah.
And then for another 8 years after that, I kept coming back once a year.
Cool.
So I had about a 13-year relationship.
Awesome.
Yeah.
When were you there last?
I was there as a tourist around before COVID. So that was around 2018 or so.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still haven't been to Europe.
Oh,
I'd love to go
if
to
I would
Amsterdam.
say two
Amsterdam's
cities,
number one.
Amsterdam and Paris, whereas the place.
Paris, yeah.
I'd go because maybe not coincidentally, they're the only two cities that weren't flattened during the war. So the architecture is still the same.
Yeah, that in Prague too.
That's right.
Yeah.
In Prague, and yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
that's right. Rotterdam was flattened because it was military strategic. It was a port, so it got flattened by the Germans. But Amsterdam was not that important apparently strategically. Yeah. And as a nice bonus to me at that time, Canadians were the one who liberated Amsterdam. Canadians were the first.
Oh wow.
Country or whatever armed forces to actually make it and chase out the Germans. So they're taught in their history books how Canada came in and said,
oh really?
So when people say, "Oh, you're Canadian, hey, let me buy you a beer."
Oh wow.
Yeah, so and I always joke, well, I can't take full responsibility for it. liberating Holland, but
Yeah.
I'll let you buy me a beer.
Yeah, exactly. I'll remember that. That's a good tip.
Yeah,
It's a good tip for Canadians out there.
That's right.
Yeah. Like, but yeah, so you name Hard Rubber, you get all these. So you did the Elvis cantata. Is that like?
that was our first big show,
Yeah,
first big multimedia show.
I think I've seen the video of it.
Yeah, there's television versions.
Well,
and
you ended
there's
up
a live
doing
version.
the video or the television version 10 years later, right?
That's right.
Yeah. I think I've seen that one. You posted it, maybe.
Yeah. We had
Yeah.
a lot of guest artists like Joe Keithley, Joey Shithead from DOA, and D. Daniels, and lots of guest artists.
Okay, so you do
Don
you do
Pemberton.
have like a pretty strong like connection to punk music then.
Back in the day, yeah.
Yeah.
I like
So,
that,
like,
and I
were
think I
you-
still do in a way.
Yeah, like were you going to like punk shows like and then going to Veggie?
Yeah,
Going to see
could be
Veggie
a
or,
little
like-
bit, but
Yeah.
there was a huge scene in Vancouver, like this
Yeah.
kind of independent. And I think I just liked because Veggie had that energy, that
Mhm.
really rebellious counterculture.
Yeah.
These are the rules. We're not going to do the rules.
You're describing Veggie like the Ramones.
Yeah,
yeah.
these are the rules, but we're not going to do the rules. We're going
Yeah.
to make up our own rules. And they would jump into the audience and dance around and play free.
Right, yeah.
And they would break the rules. And one thing I realized about myself, I'm not a bebop musician. I don't have tons of Fred Stride composing chops,
Mhm.
but I'm good at thinking, if these are what are the things I'm not supposed to do? What are the
Yeah.
things and it's also easier for me to think in that way.
Yeah.
What am I not supposed to do? And then do that.
Right.
And they kind of make it work, kind of make it interesting.
Yeah, like when you're composing, I mean, I think it is a really good example of like, knowing the rules and then breaking them, right? Like with your training, having gone to UBC and everything, and studying these great composers like Penderecki
Yeah.
and stuff. And so you listen to free jazz, and I think, it sounds like you have like a sensitivity to energy, like the energy that music
100%.
has, right?
And that's one of the big things I got from Hugh
Yeah.
is that energy translates.
Yeah.
No matter who you are, no matter what you're playing, high energy translates. So that was a big part of my composing, is trying to write energy into the music,
Right.
and try to present your musicians in a certain way,
Totally.
and set them up for success in a
Yeah.
way, right? And he would do that. Like he would, Campbell Riga would always be featured on this fast bebop thing.
Yeah.
And they go, okay, that's Campbell's thing. And Phil Dwyer would be featured on this more of a Mortal Coltrane thing. And
Yeah.
and he would create stuff that
that's
way.
cool. Yeah. I remember I was I wrote a review for Will's website a couple of years ago of one of Dean Teeson's records. And I described the way that Dean writes as sort of like modular, where he has like he will write a piece of music that has a specific person in mind.
Okay.
And like, so that person, he'll just drop them into the song and they will do what they do.
Right.
So like you just treat the person as like this module.
Right.
Like you can just click them in to the arrangement.
Right.
And then if they're, I guess, if you keep them happy,
Yeah.
then they'll be able to do the thing that they do.
That's right.
Right. And I think that's a really cool way of
Yeah.
being able to compose that exists in the jazz world that doesn't necessarily exist in the classical world, unless like
No.
you have like a
But
maybe a
Duke was
sonata written for
Duke was
somebody.
well known for that. He would write features
Yeah.
for his musicians. He would write features for his musicians.
I mean, I guess that idea is part of
Yeah.
the tradition,
Yeah.
right? And that could be sort of the through line, like as far away from the traditional big band as you might think of the Hard Rubber
Right.
Orchestra. It still has that tradition
Yes.
of being like,
But
this is
especially in
for
the
this
early
guy.
days, I try to write high energy music, exciting, making it as exciting as possible.
Yeah.
And I'm not so much. I even though I'm still probably really good at that, I try not to do that anymore. Only
Yeah.
because I've written so much of that kind of music.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to I'm now going through another phase of my life right now. I'm trying to write this kind of meditative kind of music these days.
Oh, okay.
These days,
And how do you where does that music manifest? Have you found a place for it yet?
Yeah, for my band called Absolute Unit.
Okay,
which is actually doing a show on October 20th
hey,
at the SFU Woodward. It's a free concert. It's an Absolute Unit. It's a band that I started 2 years ago. It's another big band, 16-piece, 17-piece band. Because I thought, oh, well, Hard Rubber Orchestra is that, but Hard Rubber Orchestra is kind of tied to a particular tradition because of its instrumentation. But if I could have 16 musicians, I don't have to have 11 horn players and 4 trombonists. I could have 4 laptop players, and I can have a projection artist and 2 keyboards and 2 drummers. I can have anything I want. And so that's what that turned up. And it's a little bit more of a ambient / drum and bass ensemble.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So
what are your influences for composing for that group?
Well, I've always liked like electronica, and drum and bass and all that sort of stuff. And and there's also born out of this series that we did before COVID called Mixophonics at Lana Lou's.
Yeah.
So once a month, there's like the first Wednesday first Wednesday of every month, we had an improv night, and we was bring up all these different people, many I didn't know, from different parts of Vancouver, different backgrounds, and just put them together, and we just all improvised.
Cool.
But it was always 2 drummers, and we have to be kind of it was a groove and ambient kind of thing.
Yeah.
And with lots of electronics, usually like 4 people in laptops.
Cool.
And it was that. We did that for 2 years, and then COVID finally shut us down.
Yeah.
And then when then I realized, I want to keep what I learned from that, but have it more structured. So it's absolutely is like half big band, half mixophonics.
Right.
So,
Okay. Yeah.
And it's people like Trent Otter and on drums. So it's like that kind of stuff. And one thing we realized is that you can do the most avant-garde, abstract stuff on top, but if there's a groove underneath holding everything together, it seems to work. It seems to work really quite nicely.
Totally. Yeah.
So I think it's probably born out of my interest in drum and bass, born out of my interest in electronica, born out of my interest in going to Burning Man and those kind of events where you're seeing like projections and electronica.
I didn't know you went to Burning Man.
Yeah, 7 times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. From 2006 to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
I've heard
11,
it's
12.
changed.
I don't know. I haven't been since 2012.
I heard it's like Commercial Drive. Like they it's become gentrified.
I don't. Yeah. Well, I think the reputation now is a lot of rich people go there now.
Yeah.
And they call these things called key turn camps, which means the ethos, the philosophy behind Burning Man is that we all show up and we create the city.
Yeah.
So we create the city. You contribute to the city, and you're part of the city. You're not supposed to show up. You're not supposed to be a spectator. You're supposed to be a participant. You're supposed to be a part of the creative process.
Yeah.
And so I think that has changed. I think you're right. And I think people are just kind of these rich people. But the rich people, some people have said, the rich people have always gone there, like these San Francisco techie people.
Totally.
But
they want to do LSD and
or whatever. Right? But it's like going to the moon, because it's like this huge prehistoric dried out lake bed. And then all these art installations everywhere, and everyone creates. So you really get inspired by the amount of creativity that people put into it. So it's basically like a big uncurated arts festival, and people have theme camps and they bring their art, and it's spectacular.
Yeah.
And when you go there, you kind of go, "Oh, I get it now. Oh, next year I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do," and you get inspired by other people's creativity. Totally. So everyone just shows up, and they part of the creativity. And I know it has that reputation for doing drugs and stuff like that. But we're talking about Burning Man today with one of my friends, and we're saying it's actually the last place you need to do that, because Burning Man is LSD. It's like the most weird, and you can't even describe it to people. It's so outer worldly.
Well, yeah, like people really are able to just sort of like explore their creativity,
and do whatever they want, not be judged by it, and all that sort of stuff.
So what were your contributions?
Easy for me. I was a trumpet player.
Okay.
So I just walked around with my trumpet everywhere.
Nice.
I was singing with DJs. I'd play, blah, blah, blah. And then people, and then it's kind of a gifting culture there. So I would do that, and people come, "Hey, have some watermelon," or,
great.
blah, 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 or blah, blah, blah. That was super easy.
Wow.
And I had girlfriends at the time who were totally into it, and we'd dress up, and they would make me costumes. It was
cool.
so much fun. It was just. But I did it 7 times. I feel like that was good. I don't need to do it anymore. And but you take a lot of that energy and you kind of bring it back to your hometown and you kind of keep that creativity going. And
right, yeah.
And I find it very inspiring.
So it's kind of like a almost like a residency or like a retreat or something.
I think that's nice. I think that's a nice way of putting it. Yeah, it's like
that's cool. I never even thought of it that way. I mean, I always thought of it kind of like being in the vein of like a music festival or something.
Yeah, except in a music fest, there's like 3 stages going on. And you pick your stage. At Burning Man, there's like 30,000 stages going on 24 hours a day for 7 straight days.
Right. Yeah.
So you just wander around, you come across these theme camps and blah, blah, blah. And like, it's insane.
And how long is it?
7 days.
It's 7 full days. Yeah.
It ends on the Sunday before Labor Day Monday.
Right. Okay. So it just happened.
It just happened.
Do you know anyone who went?
Always. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
A lot of my friends. And you start to see the pictures and you go, it'll be fun to go back. Yeah. But it's a lot of effort to go there. It's like a 20-hour drive and you have to take a lot of your you can't.
Wasn't it last year like where a bunch of people got stuck in the desert?
Yeah, it rarely rains there, but when it does rain there, everything turns to like this thick concrete mud.
Right, yeah.
So you can't even move.
Yeah.
And it was in 2 days it was fine.
Yeah.
And the newbies hated it, but the veterans loved it because that's what they love about Burning Man.
Well, you would be fine. You've been stuck before and been helicoptered out.
That's right. And it was funny because you mentioned that because I remember that happening. And I'm going, actually, I'm very equipped for this because I ended up enjoying being stuck in there because it just takes.
Well, let's tell the listeners who aren't aware of this story. This is an amazing story from 2 years ago now.
Yeah, about
3 years ago. Yeah, in the middle of COVID, where there was it was a mud or a rock
it was
slide.
after the heat dome that we had, and then we had a atmospheric river, they called it.
Yes.
So it rained cats and dogs for like 5 straight days.
Yeah.
And then I was at my mom's, and my mom said, they're closing down the number 1 highway. My mom lives outside of Merritt, called the Nicola Lake. So I drive home, and by the time I got to the Hope area, traffic was diverted. Mm-hmm. There was a huge mudslide in front of me and a huge mudslide behind me.
Yeah.
And me and about 200 other cars, or 100 other cars and about 200 people were stuck there. And we didn't know what was going on. Because it was just pouring rain and it was pitch black and there was no communication. And we're driving back and forth. I didn't know what was going on. And finally, we just spent the night there and woke up the next morning and checked my phone. And CBC News said, we're part of the news now. And they're going to send these helicopters to kind of like get us out there one by one. Yeah.
Yeah. You were on the news.
Yeah.
Yeah. You basically told the story just like that.
Yeah. And it was funny because Margaret Gallagher from CBC News, she was sure about it. Because, can I call my friends? Can CBC News call you at 7 a.m? So I did a live radio interview. Right. And then I did a live television interview that night. And the Globe and Mail called me. And I did a 4th interview. I forget what it was. But yeah. Yeah. It was weird.
And so you got helicoptered into what, Chilliwack?
Got helicoptered into Agassiz.
Agassiz, yeah.
Which is only just 5 minutes away.
Right.
And when we landed there, there was ambulances there, and all these people had brought blankets and food. And,
yeah.
And
I remember I was in the bigger band.
Okay.
I think that's when I was in the bigger band.
Okay.
And
we canceled rehearsal.
We canceled a rehearsal, and then I think we were supposed to have a show. It was like right before, like I think the show.
This would have been like November. It could be because I think this was like November.
Yeah.
And so I was like stuck in Agassiz for like 3 days with no way of getting out.
Yeah.
And finally, float planes kind of took us out of there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess it took a while.
Yeah.
To get everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And you were. I just remember you coming and we were like, he's alive.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, it makes for a good story for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
But I actually really enjoyed it. I mean, I never felt in danger, but I enjoyed the unusualness of the event.
Sure. I think I kind of get that.
Yeah.
Like obviously there's just sort of the baseline level of anxiety that would happen because of that situation. But then you sort of like get over that hump.
Well, once I realized all the people around me, no one was in danger.
Yeah.
And I never felt I was in danger.
Right.
My girlfriend thought I was in danger. She thought another mudslide was going to come and wipe us out, which I guess is always...
I guess that's logical to think.
I guess it's always possible.
Yeah.
But yeah, once you kind of get over me being in danger, then I kind of realized, this is kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of like a survival situation.
Yeah,
and like... But everyone's like got their car, so like you can go into your car for shelter and like
we spent one night in the car, and by me, by the time 4 in the afternoon came, it was my turn to go in the helicopter.
Yeah.
And they took like us 12 at a time.
Right. Okay.
And I was more afraid on the helicopter than I was
Helicopters are scary.
Well, it was like this wind gets us and we're going back and forth.
Totally,
and
yeah.
There's a guy across from me going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. He was freaking out. Right. And I was scared too, actually. But it was awesome.
Yeah, man. Yeah. That's that's such a unique experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you feel like you were prepared for it from your years at Burning Man?
Well, that's what I thought. I realized, I'm actually ready for this, because Burning Man is actually, I tell people it's the best time you'll ever have, because it's survival camp there. It's hot and it's dusty and it's very inhospitable and it's a terrible place.
Right.
But you'll have magical experiences there, but you'll have terrible experiences there too, because it's so.
Well, you're dealing with everybody.
It's survival camp, and you have to be, I think, psychologically tough to get through it. It's not a nice place. I think people see videos, they go, oh, it looks wonderful.
Yeah.
And you get there and it's hot and there's dust storms. Yeah. And it's a formidable experience. It can be anyways.
Right.
And
so it's like there's a level of just like you feel rewarded for having done it.
Yeah.
Just the fact that you were able to survive.
I think so. But I think anytime you travel to any kind of, anytime you travel, you're always going to run into things going wrong, and that's part of why we do it, is for those experiences.
Totally, yeah. And so I wonder, I mean, like, I did want to talk about just like composition in general.
Sure.
And like, from what you're describing is like you have sort of a concept, right? Like where you want to take colors that exist in free jazz and sort of recreate them with a certain level of control.
Something like that. Well, right? my first experience was through free jazz, to that language. Okay. And then I rediscovered it again through Ligeti and people like that.
Okay, so you heard free jazz first.
Yes.
And then you heard Ligeti and you're like, oh, I remember this.
Well, because we were, when you were studying music history, you started Bach and Beethoven and Wagner, and then Berg, and then like the modernists like Elliott Carter and Barrio and people like that. Mm-hmm. And it's very abstract and it's very heady and it's very intellectual. And then
it takes a stark left turn.
Yeah. And then Ligeti for me was, here's that language, but his forms were very, very clear and it all made sense. And then when I discovered Penderecki and Lutoslawski, it was very gestural, it was very dramatic, and for me it felt like more punk rock to me.
Okay, yeah.
And it was very colorful, and I love the countercultureness of it or whatever, or just the intensity of it, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I thought, instead of writing this music for classical musicians and oboe players and violinists, what if I wrote it for Phil Dwyer and Pat Caird and Hugh Fraser and that kind of stuff? That made sense to me.
So is that like the source of inspiration for you? Just like wanting to recreate certain things from there in your own world?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I felt at the time the music had to be as dramatic as possible. Mm-hmm. It had to be over the top.
Right.
Partly because I as a music composer, I'm not equipped with a lot of nuance in my composing.
Okay.
Right. I'm not like Dean is a great composer. He has, he's very harmonically intricate and all that sort of stuff. Right. Fred Stride, all those kind of people. Bill Kuhn. I don't have those kind of chops. But if I think dramatically and high energy, and I use these other influences, I can write some cool pieces.
Yeah.
So that was my strategy.
And so, do you think that there's like people talk about like the composition bug, like getting the bug,
right?
Like, is that did you feel like you had the bug early on, or is it something that just sort of came out of?
I was composing in high school.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I had no idea what I was doing, but I was fascinated with the process.
Yeah.
I was fascinated how difficult it was.
Yeah.
I was fascinated by, oh my God, every note you hear, when you hear an orchestra or a piece, every note was a decision. Because when you hear Beethoven or whatever, it all just makes sense.
Yeah.
It just sounds like a gesture.
Yeah.
Right. It all sounds like a natural thing, but you realize, I love that. Someone had to make a decision on every single note.
That's true.
And then when I tried to do it, I couldn't believe how time consuming and how laborious it was and how difficult it was. So I already had that bug. And especially when I got together with Veggie, they were all so much better than me. Yeah. I wanted to be even in high school or whatever. I wanted to be Clifford Brown. I wanted to be that burning.
Yeah.
But I realized my brain doesn't do that. And I wish when people like you and all these burning beboppers, I still have no idea how you guys do it. So, but at least through composition, and like someone like Chris Gestrin or whoever, it takes them 5 minutes to make a 5-minute piece. They just improvise an amazing piece.
Right.
In front of me,
Yeah.
But for me to do that level for me to do a 5-minute piece, it might take me 5 weeks.
Okay.
Right. But I figured if that's what I have to do, that's what I have to do.
I mean, yeah, I think it's all about like intention, right? So like if it takes you that long to sort of approve your decisions, then so be it.
Yeah.
Right. And so for someone like, Chris Gestrin, he just has a looser policy with allowing his decisions to come through, but he's also just like,
yeah, but but it's like, I could say that about Bruno and Sharon and you name it. Any one of you great improvisers who are the master improvisers, and you name it, you could, and I've seen it happen all the time. You guys just sit down and you just improvise like this beautiful piece of music I'm going, wow, how do you guys do that?
Yeah, chords are kind of cheating. Like being able to, having access to chords.
But you still have to be able to do it. Some people, not everyone can do it. But I've always admired people who have those chops. Brad Turner, you name it.
Yeah.
And I figured, well, I want to contribute, and but for me to do it, I can do it through composition. At least through composition, you can take your time. You can go back, rewrite until you're happy. And if you're happy with it, hopefully 20 years from now, you'll still be happy with it.
Yeah.
So that's my feeling. So in pieces I wrote 20 years.
Because I know a lot of people say, like they compose something and it takes all but 5 days for them to become sick of the composition, right? Like they become disgusted with what they've done. Like almost like it's this bodily function.
Right.
Where it's just like, that was me? Like I made that music? Like you don't feel that way?
Well, say that again, that I will get sick of it for 5 days?
I mean, some people, like some... I mean, I've definitely felt this way about my own compositions sometimes, where, like, I'm very undisciplined when it comes to composition. Where I'm just thinking like, okay, it's probably time for me to go to bed right now, and then suddenly I have this idea for a tune, and then I just black out and like write a tune in 45 minutes,
right?
And I think, wow, I'm such a genius. This is amazing. I feel euphoric.
Yeah.
And I can't believe I wrote this piece of music. And then, it could be 5 days later. It could be 5 months later or something. I go back to that piece of music and I'm just like, oh, this is nothing. This is drivel.
Well, I do a different process than you. I write long form pieces. Sure. Generally speaking. Yeah. So, so that usually means anywhere from 20 to 200 hours. Yeah. Like 200 hours on the big pieces. And
see, that to me is unimaginable.
Right.
That I can't. That's
I think of it like building a wall. You spend 2 hours, when I'm in a serious composing mode, I have a hard time working more than 4 hours.
Yeah.
But I'll do 4 hours a night over a long period of time. And that could be 3 months.
Huh.
Like for the big, I don't do those pieces so much anymore, but when I would work, like I've written for the Vancouver Symphony and CBC Orchestra and all these other new musical ensembles and other commissions. That's not unusual. Like you go to ask any composer, they're putting in 200 hours for a piece. Yeah. Like my partner Jocelyn, that's what she would do. And she was going from deadline to deadline to deadline to deadline. And but it's a different, I think people like you're not used to that. Yeah. And I think, but it had you, if you wanted to write, so the easiest thing to do is to write a bunch of those tunes, those 45-minute tunes, but write like 20 of them. Okay. And then go, okay, now if I were to make a suite out of this, kind of what way Duke might do that. This will go here, this will go here. Theme 1 will come back later. Oh, theme 2. Oh, maybe I can turn that instead of a 20-bar idea, maybe I can turn that into a 50-bar idea and keep it developing. Right. And then this idea can come back, and just actually make a story out of it. Yeah. And think of it that way. So us as jazz musicians, we tend to go, okay, I'm going to play the head. Now we're just going to improvise for 7 minutes. So
that's the world that I know. That's like where my training is as far as like I mean, I haven't had much compositional training besides like the classes that you take in
Right.
your undergrad, and like I graduated over 10 years ago now, and so like it's.
But the trick is not to stop after.
Yeah.
Just to keep the energy going.
Yeah.
And force that to happen. And sometimes, I know what you're like. Sometimes you sit down and nothing happens.
Yeah.
And it feels like you're like just feels awful. And sometimes you sit down and the universe makes sense and it feels like you're not even trying.
Yeah.
And then, when you sit down, you don't know which of those is going to happen.
Totally.
So, but the fact that you're sitting down and trying to make it happen, means something will happen. But it's like you can't wait for inspiration.
Yeah.
It's when you have a deadline, you can't wait for inspiration.
Yeah, of course. That's a good piece of advice. But so do you think of? So if you're writing all that music, and you're building a wall, right? You're laying down each brick. Do you feel like sometimes, like, you're in the middle of writing something, you're like, this is not my strongest work? Or do you just wait for the end
You just
product?
keep working on it. You keep working on it. Because it's easy for me to write a crappy piece of music and make it better rather than try to come up with a great. I think because I've been teaching composition for a while, so I think myself including students make the mistake of thinking you have to have a great idea and then write it down. And for me, anyways, it's easier to write crap.
Right.
And then go back in there and make it better, make it better, make it better, make it better.
So start with an idea, no matter what it is. Start with an idea.
Yeah. And it could be a rhythmic idea, harmonic, could be a bass line, could be a chord. It's good to listen to other music.
Yeah.
And go, oh, I like that idea. I'm going to do a version of that just to get the ball rolling.
Yes.
And
a lot of the time that's what it is for me.
Yeah.
Is like I'll hear something and be like, oh, I'd love to have a version of that that's mine.
So I would challenge you, once you think the piece is finished,
yeah,
instead of going directly to solos, go, okay, can I say this again in a different way? And can I continue the thought? Again, so instead of going to a solo, just keep the composition going. Yeah. So that's the tough. No, it's easier to work backwards. Yeah. Go, okay, this is where I am. How can I get there? Yeah. And sometimes it's kind of cool to write not a good piece of music in a sense, almost on purpose. So when you get to the cool piece of music, it sounds amazing. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And I've been listening to lots of salsa lately, and I realized, that's their trick. They write the coolest piece of music in the middle when the band kicks in. Yeah. And they kind of write this schmaltzy tune in the beginning, and then they go what's called the mambo, the chorus section, where the band kicks in. But that's actually the hip part of the piece.
So for you, everything is valid. Like every type of
totally
everything that you can write, it can be used.
Sure.
So you don't believe in waste
in
waste. Yeah, like you don't.
I mean, you don't end up using everything, but I end up using most things that I write. I find a place for everything.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I've heard the opposite from a lot of people who are great musicians, who are just like, oh, I have like piles of crumpled up.
I hear that all the time too. Yeah. But what happens is you can, that 6 bars of crap that you wrote. Yeah. If you put it in the right place, it'll actually make sense. Just don't make it the focal point of the piece.
Right. So it's a puzzle. It's kind of a puzzle.
100%.
Right? Because, I mean, that makes a lot of sense because, from the people that I've heard that from, like I've heard like Brad Turner said that once. Right. Where he's just like, there's so much unplayed written music in my office that I just have given up on. And to hear that, if you're like a young musician, you're just like, how, what? Yeah. Him? Like, but it is, I guess, just a question of like, how does that music get used?
Yeah, I guess I don't use everything, but I end up using it a lot. And like I said, if you put it in the right place, if you don't make it the focal point of the piece, you can usually find a nice place for it. Yeah. But of course, as you write like these 10 pieces, as I'm saying, and piece number 5 and number 7 are like, you reckon, oh, that's the cool part of the piece. Then you focus on that. Okay. On those pieces. And then
Right. So there's always going to be sort of a, I guess, so it's just like you sort of kind of just keep digging. You just got to keep digging. Yeah. And
sometimes in the middle of the shower, you're going for a walk. It's, I know what to do with that crappy piece of music.
Right,
those 9 bars that I thought were.
So do you have like a process for working out musical problems?
A process.
Like, you go for a walk?
Totally. I love going for walks.
Yeah.
And I often keep a piece of paper with me.
Okay.
Yeah. If I'm really on a deadline, I have to think. Like I used to make that my number one way of composing. Like I would not sit down and write, but I would go for walks and try to, because the best ideas come to you when you're not thinking about the music. You're just in a way. I used to do that a lot.
That makes sense because music is life.
Yeah, and also, so here's the thing I'm going through these days. My latest obsession is that when we experience something, whether it's for 30 seconds or 3 minutes or 9 minutes, how can I put this? It's a different kind of music. You know, it tends to, it becomes like a meditative or transforms over time just because you're experiencing it for a longer period of time.
Right.
But usually we don't have the bravery or whatever, the patience to try one idea for a long period of time.
Right. Wow, that's a really.
But if you can stick to that, be brave and hold on to your convictions, it'll turn into something. Either that or be really boring. But you know what I mean? It's like,
well, yeah, but I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, where, you know, from what you're describing, you know, you could think of a piece of music that lasts for 30 seconds only.
Yeah.
Is probably something that's very intense in one way or another, right? So like it's harmonically dense.
But jingles are like that also.
Sure.
Yeah, they're meant to work 20 seconds or 30 seconds long.
Right.
Or something like that.
Yeah. But I mean, like if you're writing a long piece of music and you have a 30-second, you know, bum, 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 right.
Right.
Like if you, then that's probably how he was thinking of, you know, Stravinsky was thinking of that piece of music is just like, okay, this is going to be this very, very intense piece of music that will only last a short amount of time because I guess the rules that exist are that like if you have something intense, it can only last so long.
Right.
So can you? Does the length of time affect the intensity of music?
Well, the music I'm writing for this time is not necessarily intense.
Yeah.
But I just don't know. I just feel a transformation that happens when you go past what you would consider the normal amount of time.
Yeah.
And I remember even Hugh Fraser saying to me, you have to take things to their illogical conclusion. So don't take things to their logical conclusion. Yes. Just go a little bit further than you think the audience is going to expect.
That's really
and
cool.
when you think about it, even as a jazz solo, you and I remember like Brecker or whoever, when you think they've hit their climax and they find another gear.
They have
and then you think, oh, that's the climax. And they find another gear. And that's when, as an audience member, that's when things get exciting.
Yeah.
And even as composition, where you think, oh, you can't go any further, and then they go further.
Yeah.
And that's when things get exciting, or they take you on a journey where you don't expect to go.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Or like, you know, in the opposite direction, like Miles Davis playing a low note.
Yeah.
The same note on the trumpet for 2 or 3 minutes straight.
Right.
Like with the band playing behind him, and he's just like,
I mean, Bitches Brew is a good example of that. It's just groove and abstraction and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
when you were talking about mixophonics, I was like, that kind of sounds like Bitches
It's
Brew.
very much totally. And I remember when I first, because my dad was a jazz musician or big jazz fan. I remember hearing Bitches Brew when I was like 6 or 7.
Oh wow!
And it terrified me. Oh, what is this?
Yeah.
And then I rediscovered it much later. And then of course, because it became my favorite album.
Yeah.
And I've probably heard it 100 times. And every time I hear it, I still hear something I've never heard before.
Totally, yeah.
It
is really one of those.
textured.
Yeah, like and because everybody's doing something. And I mean, like, was there that deep of a concept in Bitches Brew, do you think? Or was it just like party music, you know, like because there are parties where it sounds like that.
But you've heard the story of how it was all made, right? Like Bitches Brew.
Tell me.
Well, my recollection, I think is that he started experimenting a little bit with electronic instruments like Rhodes, piano, and organs and stuff like that. And then at one point,
an electric guitar, like he was. Apparently, Jimi Hendrix was supposed to be involved in that project.
Yeah, he was a big Hendrix fan. He was a big Santana fan.
Yeah,
he was going out with what's her name, Mabry. his girlfriend at the time.
Oh, okay.
And she was into she was a funk artist herself.
Okay. Yeah.
Then he decided to get let's get in 3 bass players and 4 drummers and 3 keyboardists and guitar, and we're just going to jam and we're just going to groove. And that's what and they recorded hours and hours of stuff.
Man.
And then I think it was all over. They just found all the best stuff and spliced it together and became the largest selling jazz album for decades after that.
Yeah.
Or for a while.
Yeah.
Until
George Benson.
George Benson.
Yeah.
But that was kind of like the music of the times too. Like psychedelic culture was happening.
Totally, yeah.
And
I mean, Miles was obviously focused on staying contemporary.
Yeah, always
above everything.
Yeah. And he was one of the few artists to do that, like Stravinsky. Like they would, especially after commercial success, I could imagine people being terrified of making big changes because you could fall flat in your face, But like Stravinsky always changed, Picasso always changed, Matisse always changed, Miles Davis always changed.
Yeah, yeah, and like that, a big part of that is being connected to younger people.
Yeah,
and it's really easy to insulate yourself in your
comfort and stay in your comfort zone
cohort.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. But I feel like you have a good habit of staying in touch with younger musicians, right?
I think being part of the schools helps
For
a lot.
sure. But I mean, you'd be surprised.
I'll admit I'm a big kid myself.
Sure.
Psychologically, I'm still 24.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
But I mean, I think I got to know you first by going to the jam at Pat's. Probably.
Oh yeah.
Because we would probably.
Yeah, I lived across the street.
Right. Yeah. So you were there a lot of the time, and so we were able to play together like once in a while.
And I would go there because I'm going out because I'm not very good at that stuff. So I kept getting my ass kicked. So I'm going, okay, next. So I kept showing up, and that's a tough situation too because I'm not. It's tough to just be helicoptered into that and go, okay, play this tune with people you don't normally play with, and the levels are different, and make it work, and it's challenging.
Yeah. I mean, I always loved it. Like I that was my favorite thing to do. Like ever since I started going to those. Did you ever go to the Goldies Jam?
No.
Oh yeah.
Oh, maybe once.
That's the one that David Blake ran.
Right.
And I remember I would just go because the band was great because it was David with Brent Maw and Winston Minkler and Andrew Miller.
Right.
And they were just playing for free every week.
Right.
And I was like, wow, what a great band. So I'll go get a slice of pizza. And
playing for free? Oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
Well, I mean, no, they're basically free.
Right.
They didn't charge admission for the jam session.
Okay.
So it was free for me. But also, I mean, like they almost played for free. I think they were making like $20 a week. And maybe they would split 2 pizzas and get a beer.
Right.
But I think those things are super important. Like having a jam session is an important way to bridge the.
And it's also important that you have venues in the city where there's no prescribed. You can only do this. You can't do that. Where musicians can go and experiment and try stuff out and not be afraid to. So for years there was a place called the Classical Joint downtown in Gastown.
Yeah.
So you could go there and try stuff out. Then after that it was the Glass Slippers. You could go and do every kind of music. And I think and then Lana Lou's, when I put stuff in Lana Lou's, it's like, we're trying stuff out. We're just not knowing what we're doing. Yeah. But we're gonna see what happens. And you don't have that same freedom at Frankie's, for instance.
No.
Like you don't want to experiment too much.
Yeah, I mean the later set you can.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah,
and there's definitely a looser vibe there for sure.
Yeah, which I think is a nice thing to have there, just because it's such a great resource as far as like a stage. With the nice piano
but you have to have that. You have to go. Oh, let's put together. A Tyrant is now like that. Yeah. Hey, let's put together a band.
Totally.
Oh, Dan, let's ask Daniel for a gig.
I've done that on multiple occasions.
Yeah, and but I think it's important to have that because it gives people a reason to make projects happen.
Totally. Yeah.
And let's try this. Let's try that.
You know? It's really nice. Yeah, it's really nice to have that specific open type of venue.
Yeah.
Where you could just pitch an idea and they're like, sure.
Yeah. And for me, it's easier if I have a gig to work towards.
Yes.
Rather than just, let's just show up and play.
Same.
You know?
Yeah.
But if you know that in 4 weeks or 3 weeks from now we're playing, then there's a little bit more focus.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And like with that, it's funny how that works, right? Because when you have the deadline and you're writing, the reason why you start, I guess, like get up and start writing that day is because you know you have a deadline.
That's right.
And you have to do it. So like maybe in a way it feels like, oh, I don't have like this divine,
right,
lightning bolt to my brain.
That's another reason why I like having this bigger band at VCC.
Yeah,
because I do my best to try to show up with something, a little bit of something.
Yeah,
because it's a great resource. So like, what is that? What would it sound like if I did this? Yeah, and like, that didn't sound as good as I thought it would. Or they write nothing. Oh wow, that sounded way better than I expected.
Yeah, I really felt like a guinea pig in that band.
Yeah,
for sure. Which was I appreciated just for practicing reading.
Right.
Yeah, I honestly feel like that couple of months we did that improved my reading.
Well, good. And if you're a guitarist and a bass player who can read in this town, you've increased your your higher ability by 1,000%.
You hear that, kids?
It's true, because it's like a lot of guitarists are not strong readers.
Yeah,
Ron is a surprisingly good reader.
Yeah,
and Andre's a really good reader on bass. And you don't need to be a good reader, but if you are a good reader, you increase your ability to be hired for gigs.
Totally, and you're gonna end up playing really interesting music. A lot of the time. Because there's composers like you and Dean and everyone else who are just like, I need a person to throw this at.
Who can read,
I need to hear not MIDI of this. I need someone to play it in real life.
Like Andre plays bass in my Absolute Unit band because I needed someone who could read, who could groove, and could also do abstract stuff too. Yeah. And Ron is like that, and so.
Well, I've always felt that like Vancouver. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like Vancouver is sort of unique in a way where we have a lot of musicians who can sort of do it all.
And I think that's the product of the time as far as being less and less work. So you have to be versatile. Yeah. It's certainly that way for me. Yeah. Like I try to be good enough that I can do a Dixie gig or a Latin gig or a free jazz gig or a big band gig. Yeah. Play all these different styles. Yeah. I work on my reading. I work on my transposition. Yeah. Because sooner or later you're going to be thrown into these situations. Yeah. So, like I know I remember one time we did the one tune at a bigger band and we had to do like a kind of a country vibe, and you like nailed this Stratocaster country vibe on Dean's piece. Yeah. Yeah. And I asked you and I go, is this your background? And you said, no. I think.
Well, I grew up playing blues music. Okay. And I loved Jimi Hendrix and stuff, and a lot of that stuff translates, right? Like you can kind of take a lot of rock guitar and blues guitar and sort of like, I think what I did was a bastardization of country
probably
guitar.
But you did a great job.
I appreciate it. Yeah. I don't think I necessarily felt like a fraud, but I think,
but you're good enough. You felt we were all trying to get good enough to get us through the situation.
Yeah, exactly.
And this summer I had to play trumpet in a new music ensemble. I had to go play with Turning Point Ensemble, which is a serious hardcore new music, super, super hyper notated. We went to Montreal and performed here, and that was a real challenge for me. That was outside of my comfort zone. Yeah. But I've never practiced so hard. Wow. For this gig, and I was very proud of myself. I got through it.
Awesome.
And by the end of the gig, I was definitely a better trumpet player than before the gig.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, because
that's a great feeling, right?
Yeah. Well, I was, because I'm not a classical player. I'm not a new music player, but I got through. So it was very nice of them to ask me, and it was very nice it was Jeremy Berkman who asked me, so it was very nice for him to have that faith in me to do that. Yeah, because I just remember like coming up, like, when I started really going to shows when I was a cap in the early 2010s. So like around 2010, 2011, 2012, I was really just trying to go to as many shows as I could. And I remember, there was 1067 every Friday. That's another great venue that we talked about earlier, where you can just go and try stuff out.
Totally, yeah.
And not be worried about some club owner going, hey, your music's too weird.
Yeah. Yeah, and the funny thing is that was a great example of this. Is that was the first venue where I ever saw Dave Sekula play.
Okay.
And he was playing a Telecaster, and he was, he had his pedal board, and he was just, doing his like free jazz Dave Sekula thing, where he's sitting down and like rocking back and forth.
This is a Dave Sekula I'm not familiar with.
Oh yeah, like the Inhabitants, Dave Sekula.
Okay.
And the like Chad Makela, it seemed, was putting together a different group every single week.
Right.
And so I would see Dave Sekula, and they were doing kind of like sort of like this free but also sort of like hardcore post-bop type thing. Dave Liebman, Steve Grossman type groups where they're just playing like super, just like balls to the wall.
Elven kind of thing.
Yeah. And like that was, mind altering to see, in my early 20s. And I remember there was this crazy show where they did like a Live at the Lighthouse tribute thing.
Right.
Like 200 people filled that space. Right. It was crazy. There were two drummers. It was Bernie Arai and Joe Poole. And nowadays, I mean, you don't like, they'll still play like some free stuff now and then, but like, for the most part, they're playing like straight ahead jazz or like kind of like more straight down the middle stuff. And they're so good at that.
Yeah.
And like, I think it's very unique in Vancouver that you have players that can really.
I don't know because I don't know the other scenes well enough.
Yeah.
Maybe Montreal has tons of these kind of players too. And like, in New York and,
that could be from what people I've, from what I've heard from people is that like the other scenes, because they're bigger, their scenes can.
Right. Be more compartmentalized.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think here, because you're right. Because, like there is a free scene here. There's a really good free scene here when you look at Doug Dillon and Peggy, but also Jestrin and Brad Turner and Andre. And these kind of people are part of that scene too. When you listen to those guys play free, they or like do more improv type stuff.
Yeah.
They're beautiful at it.
Yeah.
They really make beautiful music when they do it, like really great stuff.
Yeah, and there just isn't like there isn't like I guess like a snobbiness around it where it's just like, yeah, sure, I could do that, but
there used to be more of that scene back in the 80s where it was a very straight ahead scene in Vancouver, and then there's the New Orchestra Workshop people, which is like Paul Plymley and that group. Ron was part of that, and there was like this free scene and then the straight ahead scene, and they didn't really cross over very much. But I think when the Jazz Fest happened in '86 and Ken Pickering started bringing all these Europeans over, and we got exposed to all these kind of European artists, and that was a big. I think that helped change. I think when Brad Turner moved here, I'm not sure when he moved here, around early '90s. I think that really helped change the scene a lot because I find he brought in the kind of more New York harmonic sensibility kind of thing that was as much here.
Okay, yeah,
and so. I've seen it. The scene today is much more what you say.
Yeah.
As far as like everyone doing everything.
Yeah.
And open to doing everything.
Yeah.
And
like just this year, I've started playing a little bit of free jazz myself. Right. I was able to play like at 80s with Hajira's Brew.
Right.
That was awesome.
I've seen that project. That's a great, good project.
And I was really happy to be asked to do that.
Yeah.
I think I did as well as I could. I got really excited. I bought a bunch of. I went over to like a craft store and bought a bunch of stuff to have prepared guitar. And I have like a little pouch with all my goodies in it now.
Right on.
And I got there. And
I think it was Ron or someone who used to have one of those milk frothers for your latte.
No.
Battery power. Rose, and you rub against the strings.
That's good.
I can't remember if it was Ron. It might have been Ron, but doing things like that, and the EBOs and all that sort of stuff.
EBOs, just like the little what are they called? Alligator clips.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That like what it does to a guitar.
I've used that on basses, like my classical pieces, where the bass player had to put alligator clips on their strings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really happy to like to have like come up in like this pretty diverse scene. Like I've never really felt, I know that like mostly what I play is pretty straight ahead, but I've never felt like there was this, I was ever like closed off to the free scene.
It wasn't cliquey.
Yeah.
That someone could call you for a funk gig, or someone could call you for this or that. Yeah.
And I think that's a really valuable thing about our scene.
Totally. But it's also like, that's how I love music. If I only had to do one kind of music, I don't think I'd be as happy. I love doing all these different kinds of things. And I love the challenge of being able to try to do these different kinds of things. And I agree with you.
Thanks for joining me.
I appreciate you asking me. I'm
totally
flattered.
Thanks for listening, and thank you to Jon for coming on and talking with me today. You can become a member for free today at rhythmchanges.ca and get the free weekly email. The email features artists, events, and recordings in our scene, plus the week's upcoming events from the gig list. Rhythm Changes is a Chernoff music production. This episode was hosted by me, edited and mixed by Justin Gorey. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.